The floor is yours.
And thank you, Water Science Policy Forum, for this opportunity. So, as Lama pointed out, I'm going to focus on India and what really water scarcity means for community livelihoods and natural resource governance, and what are its linkages with migration as a result. So, just to give you a quick snapshot, in the context of India, 54% of the country is facing high to extremely high water stress, which means close to 600 million people going without water for a month of the year. So that's the kind of scarcity or the kind of stress that one is talking about in the context of water. And this is happening where India is home to 18% of the world's population and has 4% of the world's freshwater resources and supports 7% of the world's biodiversity as well. So that's the kind of story that's panning out in the context of India. And I'll zoom in into the western state of Maharashtra. 70% of India is semi-arid, and Maharashtra is no different as well. It is one of the wealthiest states in the country and contributes 15% to the annual national GDP, so to say. But agriculture is sort of the foundation on which the fiscal deficit of this state really, if the fiscal health of the state depends. And once we are talking agriculture, we are also talking water, because the availability of the water across the region within Maharashtra itself is very skewed. And as you would see, Marathwada region has 438 cubic meters of water per person, whereas the rest of Maharashtra, when you average it out, is 1,346. So it's in this context that what does scarcity mean and what is happening. I will zoom into the story of Marathwada through my next slide. So, talking about Marathwada, as you see within Maharashtra, it's located pretty much central in the central part of Maharashtra. The hydrogeology of Marathwada region is mostly basaltic, which is deep rock aquifers, and that's an important point as I am talking about it, because there are no big surface water systems that are there that are naturally occurring. So most of the water is actually groundwater that is used. So what has happened in the context of Marathwada, you do see that it's got 700 millimeter average annual rainfall and has a population of about 18 million people, with agriculture being the key livelihood. Within which, when we are talking about Marathwada, the focus, while there's so little rainfall and there's so little water, the focus is on sugarcane and BT cotton. And that's the problem, because you're talking about a water scarce, a physically water scarce region being pushed to being pushed to grow sugarcane and cotton in some sense because of the policy drivers. And that has had impacts, especially in a context where very easily we do tend to say that climate change is the face of water scarcity is the face of climate change in some sense, which is true. But then water scarcity is of many kinds. And what is currently happening in Marathwada is it is resulting in households migrating, not just for work, but more importantly for food and water, because both cotton and sugarcane are cash crops. They do not provide you with the necessary food that you need. And if that fails, it therefore becomes a difficult arena to live in. And unfortunately, Marathwada, as a result, has become the farmers' suicide capital of this country because of the number of suicides that have happened due to deaths and due to the loss of crops in the region. So when we are talking about all of this, it's important to also understand how the policy is reacting to it, or what are the policy leverages that have resulted in what has happened so far. And doing that kind of an analysis, and this was analysis that was done as part of the work that Shuchi, who's also part of WSP, and I did while we were at the Nature Conservancy. And the focus has been that we are talking about a reduction in water when there is no water, what do you talk about? You talk about increasing water infrastructure. So through dams. So Maharashtra is the state which has the most number of dams in this country. And despite that, it has water scarcity. So that's the paradox that one is talking about. And if you see in this infographic as it is, that there is a constant rise in the investment that is going into programs for drought relief, programs for water infrastructure. But when you start looking at that from the perspective of what is happening to the groundwater, and that's the point I was raising in the beginning, that when you start looking at the groundwater, it clearly shows that 71% of the blocks in Maharashtra, and that's close to almost all the blocks in the Marathwada region, which have seen at least a loss of 3 meters, or in some cases even more, in terms of groundwater depletion in the last 5 years. And nobody is talking about this aspect. So this is one side of the story. The other is the entire aspect around agriculture policies and what agriculture policies are pushing. And the point about sugarcane and cotton, which probably shouldn't have been grown here, are being pushed through state processes of minimum support price guarantees, where farmers know that they will definitely get a good price if they grow sugarcane and cotton. So they move on, and then there's a water mining, which is what is resulting in the scarcity, and as a result resulting in migration, because when there's no resources, what do the people do? And it is from this that I would want to propose a couple of things here. That first, when we are talking about water scarcity, and the kind of approach that the state has often taken is reactionary in nature. It is just treating whatever symptoms are being seen in the process. And in doing so, they always look at the community as a beneficiary. They're not seen as active change agents whose understanding of their ecosystems are important. And as a result, this becomes a sort of, one project cycle ends and another project cycle begins, but there is no sustainable solution in sight. And it is in this continued cycle that these problems continue to happen without any understanding of the socio-ecological system as such. And that is where, when we are talking about groundwater is always seen as an individual property. Your land, the water below your land is your water. But the point is, the aquifers are common. And when we are talking about common aquifers, we are talking about common management of these aquifers. And when these common property regimes tend to disintegrate, this is what happens. So in some sense, if we are really talking about making changes and bringing about change in landscapes like this, it's common. I mean, 70% of India is a landscape similar to this. It may not be as pronounced. Of course, Marathwada is the epicenter of drought in some sense. But if policymaking has to focus on addressing the issues of scarcity and as well as migration, it really needs to look at understanding aquifers, bringing in plural knowledge systems where you're talking both of the formal and the informal knowledge networks to understand what's happening to the socio-ecology of the region, to be able to therefore address and grapple with some of these questions. And I'd like to leave with that policymaking has to focus on institutional frameworks, on looking at groundwater as a common resource to tackle the issue of scarcity and migration. And with that, I'll leave you and look forward to the conversations here on. Thank you.